Go.
If one has two groups of daughters from two wives, and he said, I gave my elder daughter in Kiddushin, and I do not know if it was the elder or the older one, or the older ones, or the elder of the younger ones, or the younger of the older ones, who is older than the elder of the younger ones. They are all prohibited except the younger of the younger ones. These are the words of Reb Meir. Reb Yossi says they are all permitted except for the elder of the older ones. If he said, I gave my younger daughter to Kiddushin, and I do not know if it was the younger of the younger ones, or the younger of the older ones, or the elder of the younger ones, who is younger than the younger of the older ones, they are all prohibited except for the elder of the older ones. These are the words of Reb Meir. Reb Yossi says they are all permitted except for the younger of the younger ones. If one says to a woman, I betrothed you, and she says, you did not betroth me, he is forbidden to marry her relatives, but she is permitted to marry his relatives. If she says, you betrothed me, and he says, I did not betroth you, he is to marry her relative. He is permitted to marry her relatives, but she is forbidden to marry his relatives. If he says, I betroth you, and she says, you betrothed my daughter, he is forbidden to marry the relatives of the elder, but the elder permitted to marry his relatives. He is permitted to marry the relatives of the younger, and the younger is permitted to marry his relatives. If a man says, I betrothed your daughter, and she says, you betrothed me, he is forbidden to marry the relatives of the younger, and the younger is permitted to marry his relatives. He is permitted to marry the relatives of the elder, and the elder is forbidden to marry his relative. A little confusing.
Well, it shouldn't be too confusing, because what we have is we have a dispute between two people. One person says, I'm married to you, and the other one says, no, you're not. There's no such thing, and we don't have any other evidence to prove it one way or another. So the person who claims the Isser, the Isser falls on themselves only, because when a person says that he's married to somebody, what he's also saying in the same breath is that he's asked to marry the relatives of the person that he claims to be married to. Okay. And the other person says, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never seen you. We never did anything. And so for them, we're not going to pass any Isser. So if they want to marry this person's brother or whatever, okay, that's fine. That's no. But in the case of the woman who claims to be married to the man, we ask him, listen, would you at least just give her a get? You don't have to worry about it. She's the one who has to worry about it, because because according to her, she's not allowed to marry anyone else. And you're claiming that you don't know her, you don't want to be married to her, so give her a gift and let her go and marry somebody else.
There was an article in the paper, and I think I threw it out by accident, about a woman who was, I think, either ordered by the court or she was jailed or something like that because she refused to.
Right? Yes, that's right. That's right. I also saw that. We actually should have shared that on the Master Mishna group, but that was actually, I saw it in Times of Israel, that normally they use these sanctions on husbands who refuse to give a get. Now he has a woman who's Masarevis get, and she gets the same sanctions because he can't remarry until she's accepted the get, according to Rabbeinu Gershon. That's because of the Cherem de Rabbeinu Gershon, which of course he has the option of overriding by getting the Heter Mei Rabbanim. If it's established that she's just being recalcitrant and she refuses to accept the get, then he can go around and say, okay, let's get the Heter Mei Rabbanim.
Right. She must have really hated him. Must have really hated him.
Yeah, because that's for a woman to do that, she's messing herself up as well as him.
Absolutely right. She's and her kids, the whole thing. All right.
Yud Aleph. Have you read Yud Aleph yet?
No, that's yours. I thought that.
No, I'm Yud Beis.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, yeah, we did this. I thought we did. Okay, Yud Aleph. If a man says, I betrothed your daughter, and she says, you betrothed me, he is forbidden to marry the relatives of the younger, and the younger is permitted to marry his relatives. He is permitted to marry the relatives of the elder, and the elder is forbidden to marry his relatives.
Okay. So Yud Beis comes and explains very succinctly things that we kind of know just from being around knowing the halacha, but this actually categorizes things very, very nicely for us. So basically, there are three kinds of relationships. There are those that are mutar, There are those that are asur, but they take effect. There are 4 types. There are those that are asur and don't even have a kiddushin, and then there are those that no, that's it. Those that are asur and simply don't take effect. Okay, that's three categories. We'll see them carry in the Mishnah. Okay. So anytime you have a mutar marriage, what's the status of the child? Okay, when you have a completely mutar marriage, the status of the child follows the father. What sort of case do you have? Kohenes, Levia, Yisraelis, Shenisu, the Kohen, Levi, Israel. So these are standard marriages between Kohanim, Leviim, Yisraelim, whatever, and there the child follows the father. Okay, nice and easy. However, any case where there's a Kiddushin, but there's an Aveira involved, okay, then the child follows whatever the blemish is of a parent. Okay, Azor, for example, Almana lekohen gadol, grusha v'chalutza lekohen hedjot. So if you have a divorcee marrying a kohen or a widow marrying a kohen gadol, so this is so here you're going to have a halal. You're following the mum of, you're going after the pagum. Just give me a second. It's my wife not giving me over here.
Here with the
Okay, so if there's a transgression, so then we set the coin to the divorcee. So there the pagum is it's not allowed, and therefore we have a halal. Zok alman. Okay, what else? A mamzer is when a sin Israel or bas Israel a mamzer and nasim. Also, if a mamzer marries a Israel, the vlad follows the pagum, which is the mamzer or the nasim. Okay.
so in this case, where there's Kiddushin and there's transgression, the offspring follows the defective one. So it's either the male or the female, whichever one has it.
Right, whoever it is, whether it's male or female that has the pagum, it goes through to the child. Right. And anyone with whom there is no Kiddushin at all, but they could be married to other people. Havlad mamzer. So there were 4 categories, right? When they are in the klal of Kiddushin, but just not with this person. Havlad mamzer. Then you have a mamzer. This is where you have an erva in the Torah, so a brother and a sister. So the brother and the sister are allowed to marry other people. They can't marry each other, and if they had relations, the child will be a mamzer. Okay, and anyone who doesn't have Kiddushin with anyone at all, not even in the parish of Kiddushin, havlad kemosa. Then the child follows the mother. So this is a child of a slave or of a non-Jew. So here the child follows the mother. So if you have a Jewish mother, then the child is Jewish, and if you have an eved, a shivcha kananis, then the child is an eved or a shivcha, and if it's a goy, then it's a goy. So then it follows the mother. We learn this from the psukim actually in Devarim. Where Hashem is warning people not to intermarry with the Canaanites. You shouldn't give your son to his daughter, nor your daughter to his son. Why? Because it says Ki yasir es b'imcha me'acharai. Because then it says he will take away your child from after me. He will take away your child. Yes, she will be. We don't say about she. Why? Because her child is not your child. That's the lumdus of it, is that if it's her child, then it's not your child. Okay. Mishna Yud Gimel. Rabbi Tarfon Omer Yecholim Mamzer Nitayr. It's possible to remove the pagam of a mamzer. How so? Mamzer shenasa shifcha. If the mamzer is married to a shifcha. Now, how could this be? So you have a mamzer who I think technically you have. I don't think the mamzer can lechatchila marry a shivcha. He has to be an eved himself. So basically, what he needs to do is he needs to sell himself as an eved to somebody who's got let's say he finds a nice non-Jewish girl that he wants to marry, and they agree to go through this whole thing, and they find a Jew who's prepared to do this with them. He sells himself as an eved to this Jew, and the woman sells herself as a shifcha to the same guy. So he says, okay, now you can. Now I want you to marry each other, and they live together, and they have as many children as they want to have. And they're both working as avadim for him. He doesn't even have to give them any work. They just have to be technically his avadim.
Right.
And then when they finished having children, then you say, okay, we're done. And he says, okay. So he gives them a shichror, and he sets everyone free, them and their children, because all of it. Why? What happens is a blood eved. So every child that they have is born as an eved, right? Because of shifcha, all of her children are avadim, but they're not mamzerim. Shichror. So now he frees them all. So now the children are free Jews. They're basically in the getter of a free Jew, which is basically the same as a convert.
Right.
Okay, so now the mamzer and is allowed to remain married to the woman, because a mamzer is allowed to marry a gioris or a meshuchreres, and their children are also meshuchrerim. So they're allowed to marry Yisraelim, and the pagam of the mamzer is gone. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Harei ze Eved Mamzer, but Rabbi Eliezer says this doesn't work. Because Mamzeris, he says, passes through to Avadim as well. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, this won't work, but the halacha does follow Rabbi Tarfon, and that actually is a valid eitzah for a mamzer to have children without them being mamzerim. It only works for a male mamzer, however, it doesn't work for a female.
And he loses them.
He himself remains a mamzer, but at least his children are kasher yedim. Interesting, yeah. So his children are allowed to marry anyone except his daughters can't marry Kohanim still, because they're still considered converts.
Right.
But other than that, they're completely kosher. Okay. Perek Dalet, Asara Yochasin Alumi Babel. So since we're talking about Yochasin, there were 10 categories of Jews who came up to Israel from Babylon. Kahane, Levi, Israeli. So the three obvious ones: Kohen, Levi, Israel. Chalali. These are the children of Kohanim who had been married to divorcees, which was okay. So they're again allowed. We'll see what their relationships are. Gere, the Charure, converts, and Charure are Meshuchrarim. That's Avadim who were freed from slavery. So they also become Jewish. Mamzere, Nesinim. Nesinim were the descendants of the Gibonim. So if you recall the story of the Gibonim who deceived Yeshua.
Right.
They said they were actually Canaanim, but they had made up a story to Yeshua that they were from far away. So he allowed them to stay. And even though they had tricked him, he was within his rights to wipe them out. He decided that the optics of that weren't good, and he let them stay in the Jewish people, but he said, you are prohibited from marrying into the clout. He made them Nesinim, and they basically have a similar status to Mamzerim. But it's kind of a derabanan, because Yeshua is not Yeshua made the rule, and so I guess it is a derabanan. But a very strong one, because Yeshua is like one generation off to Oraisa. Okay. In a senate, Shisuki and the Asufi, and Asufi we're going to explain in the coming Mishnayos. Shisuki is when the word comes from the quiet. Asufi is from the word gather, to gather, and we'll explain in the coming Mishnayos what these categories were. Now, of these, who is allowed to marry each other? Kahane Levi Israeli. So Kohen Levi in Israel, Mutarim Lavo Zebazeh. All of these are allowed to marry each other freely. Okay. Levi Israeli Chalali Geri V'Charure, Mutarim Lavo Zebazeh. So take the Kohanim out of the picture, and now we include the convert classes, basically converts and freed slaves. So they're allowed to marry Israelim and Levian. Okay.
That's strange.
So that overlap. So once you remove the Kohanim aren't allowed to marry Gerim.
Right.
The Leviim are. Okay. So now that little part of the Venn diagram is cleared. Gere v'charure mamzerim nasine. Shisuki v'Asufi kulam mutarim labo ze v'ze. So all of the convert classes and all of the pagam classes, they're allowed to marry each other. So convert and mamzerim are allowed to marry each other, and all these other classes. So they're allowed to intermarry. But again, of course, as we learned in the Mishnah, the earlier Mishnah, the pagam is going to carry through to their children.
Yeah.
Okay, that's our Mishnah for the day.
Okay. Sota.
No, Kiddushin, Aleph. Kiddushin, Aleph.
I'm sorry, Aleph.
Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. Aleph.
Aleph.
Aleph Tes. Yes, Aleph Tes.
The rites of smicha, waving, bringing clothes, kamitza, burning, malika, sprinkling, and receiving pertain to men and not to women, except for the meal offering of a sota and the female Nazarite, in which cases they wave them. Every commandment which is dependent on land applies only in the land. That which is not dependent on land applies both in the land and outside the land, except for Orla and Kalayim. And Reb Eliezer says also Kadash. Whoever fulfills one commandment is benefited. His days are prolonged and he inherits the land. And whoever does not fulfill it, one commandment is not benefited. His days are not prolonged and he does not inherit the land. Whoever in the study of scripture and Mishnah and conducts himself properly will not easily sin. It says three-ply cord is not easily severed, and whoever is involved neither in the study of scripture nor Mishnah and does not conduct himself properly is not part of civilization.
Okay. Now we can do Sota. Yes.
You said, I'm sorry, what did you say?
Tes.
Ches?
Yeah.
Boy, I messed up over here. I don't see it.
Sota, number 9, Mishnah 8.
Yeah, Ches, that's right. Yeah. Okay. Oh, you said test. Okay. I thought I heard Ches. Okay, all right. Okay, I was good. When the number of murderers increased, the Egla Arufa, right?
No, the previous one. Ches.
I thought you said, okay.
Ches, not Ches.
If one witness says, I saw the murderer, and one witness says, you did not see him, or if a woman says, I saw the murderer, and another woman says, you did not see him, they decapitate a calf. If one witness says, I saw the murderer, and two say, you did not see, they decapitate a calf. If two say, we saw the murderer, and one said to them, you did not see, they do not decapitate a calf. When the number of murderers increased, the Egla Arufa rite was stopped. From the time of Eliezer ben Dina and Ben Kina, who was called Ben Perisha, they then switched to calling the son of the murderer. When the adulterers increased, the bitter waters were discontinued. And it was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai who discontinued it. For it stated, I shall not punish your daughters when they commit harlotry, nor your daughters-in-law when they commit adultery, for they themselves. Why did they stop that? Why did he stop it after that? I thought it was like it's a direct commandment.
Because there were too many. Because there were too many, it had become part of the culture. And like it's supposed, the Sota was supposed to shock people, and this was something.
It wasn't doing it. It wasn't bringing. It was bringing a more promiscuous behavior rather than anything else.
Yeah.
So people seeing this happening didn't stop them. That's okay. When Yossi ben Yosei, the leader of Sarida, and Yossi ben Yochanan, the leader of Yerushalayim, died, the cluster ceased. As it is stated, there is no cluster to eat, no first fruit which my soul desires. Yochanan called Gadol set aside a vow of the tithes. He also abolished the awakenedness and the strikers. Until his days, the hammer would pound in Yerushalayim, and in his days, no man had to acquire regarding Demai.
There's all the desires that Yochanan Kohen Gadol made in that Mishnah, which we also mentioned in Bikurim, I think, Master Sheni. Right. Okay. Kasubos, Bab Aleph.
Whoa. This is all messed up. Vav what? I'm sorry.
Yes, number 1. 6-1.
Yeah, I usually not like this. A woman's findings in her husband's handiwork belong to her husband, and her inheritance he enjoys the usfra of during her lifetime. Restitution for her disgrace and impairment belong to her. Yehuda ben Becerra says, when it is in a hidden place, 2/3 belong to her, and 1/3 to him. And when it is in an open, 2/3 belong to him, and 1/3 to her. His share is given to him immediately, but as for hers, land is bought with it, and he enjoys the usfra. If one agrees to give money to his son-in-law, and his son-in-law dies, the common say, and he can say, to your brother I wanted to give, but to you I do not want to give. If she agreed to bring him 1,000 dinners corresponding to this, a man he must contract to give her 1,500 zuz. But corresponding to appraised goods, he contracts to give a fifth less. Goods appraised for 100, which are worth 100, he has nothing but 100. Goods appraised for, he gives 31 salam and a dinner for 400. She gives 500. Whatever the groom contracts, he contracts less than a fifth. Okay.
Erevin.
Okay.
Erevin Aleph Yud.
Aleph Yud. That's right. They may surround the camp with pickets, provided that the space between one picket and the other is not 3 fists. They spoke of a caravan. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda, but the Chachamim say they spoke of a caravan only because it is common. Any partition not consisting of a warp and a weft is not considered a partition. These are the words of Rabbi Yossi ben Yehuda, and the sages say either of the two. 4 obligations were waived in the camp. They may bring wood from anywhere. They may exempt from washing hands, from demai, and from making an erev. They may erect slats around the wells, 4 double posts, which seem like 8. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir says 8, which seem like 12, 4 double posts and 4 single ones. Their height is 10 fists, their width 6, and their thickness any size whatsoever. And between them is the equivalent of 2 teams of 3 oxen, and which these are the words of Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Yehuda says 4. Tied but not loose, one enters and one exits. It is permitted to place the slats close to the well, provided that a cow has its head and most of its body within while drinking. It is permitted to place the slats at any distance, provided one increases the slats.
Okay.
Yehuda says until
That's it.
Okay.
Mikvahs.
Gimel.
Gimel.
If the cistern is full of drawn water and a canal flows into it and out of it, it is forever in its disqualified state until it is calculated that 3 lugim of the former water do not remain. If 2 vessels emptied into a mikvah, one of them a log and a half, and the other also a log and a half, or if one wrings out his garment and the water pours into the mikvah from many places, or if one pours out a perforated cup and the water pours into the mikvah from many places, Rabbi Akiva declares it's still valid, but the Chachamim disqualify it. Said Rabbi Akiva, did they not say a vessel's empty? But if a vessel empties, they said to him, they said neither one nor the other, but a mikveh into which 3 lugim of shvuvim fell. The waters from one vessel, from 2 or from 3 combine, but from 4 they do not combine. Similarly, regarding a Balkari who was sick and 9 kabam of water fell over him, or a person who was tahor and 3 lugim of drawn water fell over his head and the greater part of his body, the waters from one vessel, from 2 or 3 combine, but from 4 they do not combine. When are these words said? When the second vessel started emptying before the first ceased. And when are these words said? When he had no intention to increase the mikvah, but if he intended to increase it, in dishes of even 1 quarter at a time, all year long combined to 3 lugim. Okay. Good.
One more.
If one placed vessels under a pipe, whether large vessels or small vessels, even dungware or stoneware or mudware, they disqualify a mikvah. Whether one placed them or forgot to them, according to the words of Beit Shammai, Beis Hillel declares a tahor when he forgot them. Reb Meir said they were counted and Beit Shammai outnumbered them, Beis Hillel. However, they agree that if he forgot them in a courtyard, it is tahor, and Reb Yossi says the dispute still stands in its place. Good. Kulin.
Kulin, yeah.
Base 12.
Yep.
If one slaughters a dying animal, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamil says it is not valid unless he jerks a foreleg and a hind leg. Reb Eliezer says it suffices if he spurts forth blood. Reb Shimon said Reb Shimon. Also, one who slaughters at night and rises early the next day and finds the walls full of blood, it is valid because it's spurted blood, which is in accordance with Reb Eliezer's opinion. The sages, however, say that it is not valid unless he jerks a foreleg or a hind leg or unless it wiggles its tail. The same rule applies to both the small animals and to large animals. A small animal that stretched out its foreleg but did not draw back, it is invalid because it is only an indication of the expiration of life. When does this apply? If it was presumed to be dying, but if it was presumed to be healthy, even if it has none of these signs, it's valid. If one slaughters for a Gentile, his slaughtering is valid, but Reb Eliezer declares it invalid. Said Reb Eliezer, even if he slaughtered so that the Gentile could eat from his diaphragm, it is invalid because the unexpressed intent of a Gentile is presumed to be for idolatry. Reb Yossi says the matter can be proven in a fortiori.
Kal v'chomer, in other words.
Excuse me?
A fortiori means kal v'chomer.
Right. If in the place where the intent renders it's valid in the case of sacrificial animals. Everything depends solely on the one who performs the service. A place where intent does not render invalid is in the case of sacrificial animals. It is not logical that all should depend solely upon the slaughterer. If one slaughters as a sacrifice to, in the name of mountains, as a sacrifice to hills, as a sacrifice to seas, as a sacrifice to rivers, as a sacrifice to deserts, his slaughtering is invalid. If two hold a knife and slaughter, one slaughters as a sacrifice to one of these things, and one slaughters for a legitimate purpose, the slaughtering is invalid.
Okay. And we're done.
Okay. Tomorrow I will. Are you going to go to early minyan again tomorrow?
So tomorrow, let me just stop